What's up guys, Seasoned of Brad here. So as I mentioned before, I am a hospitalist physician assistant in my local hospital. It's basically like a general medicine doctor that takes care of you during your hospital stay. So I work night shift, which means the bulk of my night usually involves me admitting patients from the ER to the hospital. So essentially the ER doctor will call me with a patient who he feels like should be admitted to the hospital. We'll go over the case together, and usually I will agree with him and will accept the patient from the ER to the floor. Now the ER is supposed to be used for, as the name states, emergency medicine only. But of course, as we all know, patients like to sometimes come to the ER for things that aren't true emergencies, which results in overcrowding of all of our ERs, which is a bad thing when you have patients who are there for true medical emergencies. So this begs the question, what symptoms warrant a trip to the ER? So in this video, I want to go over 3 symptoms that I feel like if you have these, you definitely need to come to the ER. So the first one is chest pain. Now chest pain is a fairly obvious reason to come to the hospital. Of course, the first thing everybody thinks of is heart attack. And rightfully so, the main symptom of a heart attack is of course chest pain. But not just that, there are several other conditions that cause chest pain that can be considered true medical emergencies. Things like a blood clot in the lung called a pulmonary embolism can cause chest pain. Even some cardiac arrhythmias that could potentially be fatal can cause chest discomfort. So if you develop sudden chest pain, don't go to some urgent care office, come to the hospital. An urgent care clinic just doesn't have the resources to properly work that up. They can't do rapid imaging or emergency labs. They just don't have the resources or capability to properly evaluate that patient. The next symptom is shortness of breath. Now this also is sometimes associated with heart attacks. In fact, I've seen several cases of patients who come to the hospital with the sole complaint being shortness of breath. No chest pain, no nothing. And after labs and imaging, turns out they have a heart attack. And not just that, pulmonary embolisms, like I mentioned before, also present with shortness of breath, as well as things like a collapsed lung called a pneumothorax can also present the same way too. Even chronic shortness of breath that's gotten worse over the last days or weeks may need to be evaluated and treated in the emergency room setting. Things like pneumonia, COPD, worsening congestive heart failure. And of course, as we've all learned over the last 2 years, so does COVID. All of these things may warrant hospital admission so we can properly take care of you. Because anytime that you're not able to properly take in enough oxygen into the body, that warrants a hospital admission. And the last thing I want to discuss today is dark colored stools. Now, talking about poop is not the most glamorous discussion ever. Nonetheless, one thing I want you to keep in the back of your mind is if you ever notice that your stool is darker than it usually is, you need to come to the hospital, because this could be a symptom of a GI bleed, more specifically an upper GI bleed. If you're bleeding from the stomach or the lower esophagus, that blood has to come out somewhere. So it works its way through your entire GI tract and causes your stool to turn very, very dark, almost black. This of course needs to be evaluated and treated in a hospital setting. You need a scope and IV medications to properly treat that. So even though it's a little weird, always make sure you look at it before you flush it. But guys, that's all for today. If you would, like and comment on the video, subscribe to the channel, and as always, have a good one.